All right, great. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on this wonderful Saturday to talk about an incredibly important issue, and that, of course, is education. My name is Danielle Lerner. I am an anchor and the education reporter for ABC 15 here in the Valley. And it is an honor to be joined by a fellow journalist, Mari Rabago. She is also joining me today. Education, of course, not only one of the biggest issues across the entire country right now, but it is also a personal passion. And so we are just so incredibly grateful to the organizers of this event for giving us the opportunity to moderate this and to really dive deeper into these incredibly important issues. And overall, we really want to stress the many ways that your vote and your voice impacts education in our communities, in our individual communities, and really all across the state. So it's going to be an incredible morning, and we're so glad to have you here. I think we can all agree that this year has been incredibly challenging. That's probably the understatement of the year, right? In so many ways, but especially for our schools, for our parents, for our teachers, for our governing boards, and really for our school leaders all across the state. But also now more than ever, I would say, as somebody who is really diving into all of the issues surrounding education on a daily basis, I think we've really seen the vast role that our schools play in serving our communities, well beyond just the academic aspect. And also how the leaders that we elect, the initiatives that we pass, how all of that has the potential to impact our lives directly and really on a day-to-day basis. You know, we have more than 1 million students in public schools in Arizona, and that's a lot of students, a lot of families. But even if you don't have school-age children, these issues still do impact you on a daily basis. So again, we're so glad to have all of you here, taking the time to really be well informed as you fill out that ballot. I do just want to kind of give a rundown of how this forum is going to work today. Today's webinar is available in Spanish and also American Sign Language closed captioning. Those are two options we wanted to make sure that we made available. So if you'd like to participate in this webinar in either of those formats, please, if you look to the bottom of your screen, you can actually turn on the translation feature. So make sure you do that. As participants, you have all been muted by the host, but if you do have a question, please feel free to type that in the chat box. And if we have time, we'll be sure to address that once we get to the end and we get through all of our speakers and panelists, because we do have quite a bit of information to go over today in this short 1 hour period. Also, most of the resources that you hear about during this webinar, we're also going to have them available on the event website. So again, there's a lot to share, a lot to take in, but you can go ahead and visit yourvoteyourschools.org or tuvototusescuelas.org, and you can access those resources and that information there even when this webinar is over. We also want to make sure that we note that all of the organizations behind today's event are nonprofit organizations with 501c3 status. So this event is really meant to be nonpartisan. We're not here to tell you how to vote or who to vote for. We simply want you to be informed on all of the issues and the roles that elected leaders play so that you feel confident in your decisions when you are casting your ballot. So this is really all about being informed and educating folks out there about the issues surrounding education. This next hour is full of all sorts of important content. We do have some guest speakers on tap to share that with you, so we want to jump right in. And Mari, it is my pleasure to turn things over to you.
Thank you, Danielle. My pleasure to be sharing the screen with you and meet you today. Well, if this pandemic and this situation with the education does not activate all mothers like myself after homeschooling with our kids, I don't know what is going to make us take action and participate in this coming up election. So I'm very excited to be here with you. And first of all, I want to ask everybody joining us through Facebook to please share this link. We want to make sure we reach the more number of people, especially parents in this moment and members of our community, so they can really make an educated decision once they go and participate with their vote. So it's an honor to be here with you. And today we're talking specifically about the many ways this election will determine the strength of our schools and future success of all our students. We all know where Arizona is in the number ranking when it comes to education. So we need to take action. We need to do something about it together. I don't have to describe for you how a worldwide pandemic has turned our schools, communities, lives upside down. As I was saying, if this does not activate us as parents to go ahead and participate in this election, I truly don't know what will get us to go and vote. Schools closures as a result of COVID-19 have opened a lot of eyes to the inequities that have perpetuated educational achievements gap for a long as anyone can remember, particularly our Latino community. I think we're seeing more clearly what it needs to be done and why it's so important for all of us to participate in this change. Arizona and this country need elected leaders who care about the issues that matter to students, teachers, and schools, including keeping kids and teachers safe. That should be always a priority. Access to technology and the digital divide, access and affordability of equality learning, or early learning also, in higher education, and so much more that as parents, I know we're seeing it firsthand now in our homes. Helping put even finer points also on education and other inequities in the current climates around racial injustice, which among other things has highlighted just how important it is to ensure all voices are heard and all votes are counted. If you have not decided to participate, if you are so disappointed with what's going or the route the campaigns are going in this election, I urge you to at least take one topic, and that topic should be education, for you to get activated and not only participate, but have everybody around you, your family, your friends, members of the community that you know, to really advocate for education in this election. Is a must, and we need to do it together. And beyond the presidential race, Arizona voters will weigh in on a competitive Senate race also, school governing board seats, local bonds, and overrides measures, and much more. So Danielle, it is the time for us to get activated.
Yeah, and Mari, I loved how you pointed out that, if this hasn't made, especially parents, more aware of the importance of paying attention to their governing board meetings, their school leaders, I don't know what will. And I can tell you, as we at ABC 15 continue to cover school reopenings and everything that's going on, it has been very encouraging to see so many parents watching those governing board meetings online and tuning in and giving their voice. We've actually met some moms who, because some of these meetings can go 4 or 5 hours, who will divvy up, okay, I'll take the first hour and then I'll update you on what happened, just so that they can stay informed. So hopefully this momentum continues forward into the election. I'm sure many of you out there have signed up to receive an early ballot by mail. Those early ballots were mailed earlier this week on October 7th. So if you happen to have your ballot in front of you, that's even better. If not, feel free to take notes and then translate what you take away from this onto your ballot once you get it. For others, I do want to highlight some key dates and information. This is something that you'll definitely want to write down, take a screen grab, whatever you have to do. First, on Monday, an Arizona judge ruled that the voter registration deadline actually was extended until 5 p.m. on Friday, October 23rd. So an additional 3 weeks. And they estimated that more than 65,000 voters could register during that 3-week period. So that's a lot of people. If you haven't registered yet, we do know sometimes registering online isn't easy for everybody, or there are certain factors that might prohibit people from registering online. This is a great time to do it. So 5 p.m. Friday, October 23rd, that's the new voter registration deadline. In addition to the option of registering online, you can also register by mail. You can print a voter registration form, fill it out, mail it back to your local election office. You can also register to vote in person if that's something that you prefer. So there are options. Just make sure you take advantage of that window if you haven't registered yet. October 23rd is also the deadline to request that an early ballot be mailed to you. Those ballots can then be returned by mail or dropped off at a polling location on election day. Again, you have options. It is recommended, though, that those early ballots be mailed no later than Wednesday, October 28th, because you want to make sure you get it in with enough time so that it's counted. And of course, the big day, Election Day, Tuesday, November 3rd, coming up really, really fast. You can find your polling location by visiting the Arizona Secretary of State's website. That's www.azsos.gov, or your respective county recorder or county elections website. There are a lot of things that we all hope that you take away from today's webinar. But I think we can all agree the most important is that you realize that your vote matters. And we want to stress the importance of voting all the way down the ballot as well. There's a lot on this ballot coming up on November 3rd. There are a lot of races. Obviously, the presidential race is a big one that a lot of people tend to start with. But there are issues, there are races well beyond the fold of that ballot that do have extreme significance for education here in Arizona. The Peoria Unified School District superintendent actually told me the other day, they're telling people to start on the backside of their ballot and start with the school initiative and then work their way all the way up so that president is the last issue or race that they vote on. So to each their own, but just a big reminder, there's a lot more on that ballot versus just that presidential race. So really excited for today. And so let's get going. Mari, go ahead. I'll hand it over to you to introduce our first two speakers.
Well, I share that excitement with you, Danielle. And before introducing our next two speakers, I want to remind that a lot of parents are in my situation. My son, my 14-year-old son, is going back to school next week. So there's nervous, there's excitement. And I want to urge all the Latinos listening to us, everyone, but particularly the Latino community that doesn't have a track record of participating in elections. If you are a citizen, if you're registered to vote, if you haven't, you still have the time thanks to this extension until October 23rd, as Danielle mentioned before, but we need to participate. If there's nothing else that motivates you to participate in this election, please, I beg you, I urge you to do it because of education. Educate yourself. There's Spanish and English information out there. There's no excuse for you to participate. And we have to take control of the future of education in our state and better that education for our kids as a community. So with that said, it is my pleasure to introduce our next guest today. And Paul Benz is the Senior Vice President of Research and Strategy for High Ground, a public affairs firm here in Arizona. He specializes in public opinion surveys and understanding the Arizona electorate. He has also been at the point of significant number of major public policy issues and has built a reputation for managing challenging statewide, regional, and local campaigns. We also have with us Tia Sosi Vigay. She's a 5th grade teacher or master teacher in Tucson Unified School District. She's a member of the Navajo tribe from Northern Arizona, and she has also spent several years coaching and mentoring others as a Title I program facilitator. She spends her days finding ways to fund her students' personal libraries because books should be in everybody's home, and I agree with that, Tia. Paul and Tia, thank you so much for joining us on this Saturday to help us understand more about the issues that are there in the ballot this fall that will impact not only the classrooms, but our community. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. Paul and Tia?
Hello. I think Tia's talking. Tia, can we hear? I see you talking. Can other folks hear Tia? Because I cannot.
I believe she's still muted. Okay. So as we say in TV, we're having some technical issues. While Tia figures that out, Paul, will you give us a little bit of understanding of what is the stake in that state and this, election, and how we as community members can actually take action and do something?
Of course, absolutely. Thank you so much. I saw Tia was going to talk, so I was, of course, letting her go first. But thank you so much for being here today, and thank you for everyone who's tuning in. This is such an important election, and I'm really happy that you're taking time on a Saturday to do this. I'm going to give you one little secret right out of the gate here, and Danielle mentioned it earlier. We gave the deadline of when you should mail your ballot in. Here's a little secret. If you mail your ballot in sooner, you'll be left alone. In fact, like any campaign worth its salt will stop mailing, calling, and bothering you if you mail your ballot. So if you want to be left alone, if you're getting a little tired of the election, what you can do is mail your ballot in. I'm going to start with a little bit of talk about education funding, but before I do, I'm going to see if we can hear Tia now. No, I cannot. We'll try again. So I'm going to blaze on for a minute here while we try again. But one of the things to bear in mind is when it comes to education funding, the state of Arizona is still right about where it was pre-recession funding levels, despite the increase in education funding that we've seen. and the 20 by 2020 plan, and the Prop 123 plan on the per student basis. And someone, I'm sure, can correct me if I'm wrong. I can't hear Tia, but everybody else can. So that's going to be really fun and an adventure. And I'll just give my numbers, and then I'll turn it over to you, Tia, and I'll follow your script a little bit. The big significant thing is that while we have had a lot of funding, we are still at pre-recession levels, and that when it comes to where the funding mix comes from, a significant more portion of our funding comes from the federal level than from the state level, because the state is underfunded when it comes to it. So proportionally, nationally, it's about 8% of the funding comes from the feds. For Arizona, it's about 13%. And the state balance is supposed to be about 32%, but out here it's 38.7 because of the disbalance. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Tia. I think we're going to start with bonds and overrides. Is that right?
Paul, I believe we're still having issues with the sound.
Okay.
So if you want to, if you can double check your settings on your phone and make sure the audio is up. Go on the side of your phone and make sure it's all the way up. Maybe that would help, while Paul enlightens us a little bit about bonds and overrides.
Sure, and I'm supposed to be the technical nerd guy. Tia's got all the great commentary, so I'm supposed to, I'm just supposed to do the boring nerd part. So I feel a little, so I guess one of the things that we've been asked to talk a little bit about is bonds and overrides. And one thing to bear in mind is, I know a lot of you use those interchangeably, but let me give you one thing, please, they are not the same. Bonds and overrides are not the same thing, and they should not be used interchangeably. They're two very different items. They do have similar goals, and they are local funding when it comes to local control, but they have different functions. And so it's important to know what those functions are so that you can use the correct terminology depending on what it is. So bonds originally were supposed to be used as special items. This was not, beyond the regular needs, but over time, basically over the last 20 or so years, most school districts have relied on some level of bond or override to offer the local level of funding that they want to provide. So I'll give you a quick little primer on the difference between the two. And someone gave me some helpful shorthand along the way, and that is bonds are for buildings and buses, which means it's about building stuff. A school district can go out for them to build facilities, for them to renovate facilities, for air conditioners and those types of things, items that will last longer than 5 years. That also you can do technology, equipment, and they're repaid over a period of time. Whereas overrides, the way I've often been heard it being told, is overrides are for people and programs, and these are additional funding to support what's inside the school or within the classrooms. They're approved for a term of 7 years. And so this is different than a bond in that they are actually approved for 7 years and are in place for the first 5 years. And then they're stepped down by a third for the remaining 2 years if they're not renewed. There's actually a couple different kind of overrides that you can go for: a maintenance and operations override, or M&O. Special override, which can be for like full-day kindergarten, PE, or art, or capital, which is for furniture, technologies, vehicles, things that may not last more than 5 years. And so a school district can go up to 15% total when it comes to an override, but not beyond that. But one thing to bear in mind is an override does not mean that a school district is not spending their money wisely, or that they're actually going beyond that they need extra money because they've overspent. That's what I think the misnomer of an override does. What it actually has to do with is, in the 1980s, they passed what was called the revenue control limit, and it was a setting of a funding level for all districts. And so in order to exceed that, to do local funding or to increase local taxes, that's what it means to override the local revenue control limit. So that is the difference there. Bonds are buildings and buses. Overrides are people and programs. And so it's really helpful to bear that in mind when you're talking about these different items, to use the correct terminology, because a lot of people think, oh, schools have plenty of money if they just didn't, if they just spent the money wisely. But the fact of the matter is, actually these monies come from a lot of different sources, can only be used certain ways. And so that's why it's helpful to be very specific and when you're talking about these items. And have we any luck with Tia about this?
Not sure. I'm not sure if Tia's been able to join the call, and if she can become unmuted, then I'll stop talking. But I did want to add, since she's not available to speak right now as a current school board member, under this pandemic, you know, the bond and overrides are so important and critical, especially for those of us who passed it in the last election cycle, because we have been able to utilize the funds to buy computers for those of us who didn't have one-to-one technology. It was so important to have those funds because no one was prepared for the pandemic. No one knew that this was coming. And for those of us who didn't have that one-to-one technology, it allowed us to purchase, whether it was computers or laptops or mobile hotspots or whatever it is that we needed at the time to provide our students with the technology that they need, because we know that one of the inequities, we've seen it and we've known about it, but this pandemic has highlighted the inequities in our school district, is the fact that most of our students did not have that one-to-one technology. So we are grateful for ours. We are grateful to our voters, to our residents who voted yes, and that's why they're so important in school boards, that they do pass, that we vote yes on them.
We also fund things like, thank you so much for jumping in here, because I know it's a little boring just to talk to me. So please feel free to jump in until we get Tia back on. A lot of overrides pay for all-day K, as particularly allowing it to be free for some school districts, which is incredibly important for parents who can't afford to pay for all-day K, and we know the importance of programs like that. It also is used for school counselors and school nurses and other items that are essential, but maybe not considered in the classroom, even though that they're an essential part of this. So one of the things that was just mentioned that I do think is really important to talk about is the difference between an off-cycle and an on-cycle election, because school districts go out sometimes in odd-numbered years, and those are lower voter turnout years compared to right now. Needless to say, 2020 is a high voter turnout year, but I loved that advice of turning over and starting on the back of your ballot, because one of the challenges you do with an on-cycle election is that you are competing with a lot of different things, including judges, statewide ballot props, and the other items. So knowing that you have local funding to go and get to that part of the ballot and make sure you go down to there is such a critical part of this, because what we really see is usually in an off cycle is lower voter turnout. 2020 is really sort of weird, as we all know. So actually in 2019, we had 64 local issues on the ballot. And our friends at Expect More have a great link on their website to show you the 36 school districts that are actually on the ballot this November. So almost half as many compared to what we traditionally see. I think that has a lot to do with the pandemic and has to do with maybe some folks not feeling like now is the time to go out with an issue like this. But usually you see a higher turnout on the 2020 as opposed to on 2019. I see Tia is back again.
I
am.
There we go.
Hey! Hooray!
You would think that I would be a pro at Zoom after all of this Zoom teaching.
So, go ahead.
Okay, so she ATLE so si began she tanasan in sham but any budgeting torque clean dash che top I introduced myself in my native language, which is Navajo. I want to welcome everybody for taking time out of their Saturdays to be here today. I just want to give a little background on how bonds have affected just my classroom and my schools, and how overrides have also affected them. So bonds, for the most part in Sunnyside Unified School District, where I'd worked for a bulk of my years, had been used for things like Wi-Fi and technology updates in our schools, which became really valuable when they had put it on the buses. When they put it on the buses, it allowed students to be able to work kind of in this commute setting. So when they were leaving school, they could start work on their digital homework and be able to do the research on the buses on the way home. And then during the pandemic, right at the end of March, what was really cool about what Sunnyside had done was they had strategically place the buses around the community so that they could access the Wi-Fi, so students would be able to still log into their classrooms online. So I know that Mari was talking about that equity and the digital divide. It was very clear when we saw students utilizing those Wi-Fi buses. Bonds have also been used in our schools to update things like AC, which is really big in Tucson. Right when we get back to school, you know, it hits those top level temperatures, and having a good working AC is always a great thing to have in our classrooms. And then usually what happens after we update the ACs is the roofs will start leaking around those new ACs, so we have to update the roofs. So when you think about those bonds and overrides, you know, think about specifically how they affect the schools in your area. You can call school districts and ask them, you know, how are these bond funds, how are they going to be allocated? Usually bonds do well if they're aligned with the goals of the community, and if bonds are really kind of given in community terms. Even myself as a teacher, wasn't really clear about what the bonds had been used for and the difference. And when I talked to Paul, I was like, oh, that's the difference about bonds and overrides. So now I see a clear delineation between the two, and now I have become a more informed voter. And then as far as overrides go, I always would like to think about The Office, show that I thought was pretty funny about the idea of budgets. And there's this one part where Michael starts talking about, I think it's Michael and Oscar, and he starts talking about that you get a dollar to run a lemonade stand. So if a dollar was given to schools, what has happened with our budgets at the state level is that if they gave us a dollar initially in the first year, the second year we only got 95 cents to run that lemonade stand. Third year, 90 cents. And so we're kind of seeing this chip away at the budget level. And so in order for us to provide the same level of services at the school, we would need to do what they call the budget override to provide us back with that dollar level of funding. So what happens was when the budget starts getting chipped away for us is that we start to lose things like our interventionists. We start to lose things like our programs for after school tutoring. We also start to lose things like all-day kindergarten, because all-day kindergarten isn't guaranteed in the state of Arizona in all areas. It's kind of given as a luxury for a lot of people. So if we want to continue to provide all-day kindergarten, we would have to utilize those overrides for that. And then also just raises to keep high-quality teachers. You know, I love my job. I love the work that we do, but it would be beneficial to maintain more of our seasoned teachers at more competitive levels, so that we aren't losing them to other states or other areas of work, and keeping them in the schools. So that's how bonds and override have affected me personally, and in our school and our communities.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad you made it, because that is way better than anything I could have said. So the last little thing, I know we're a little short on time, but I know there's a statewide initiative, Prop 208, that's on the ballot. So one thing I get questions a lot about is what's up with the prop numbers? Where do those come from? And so I thought it would be one really helpful thing to know is what those actually are. And so the 100 series, when you hear about Prop 100, 101, those types of things, those are constitutional amendments. So those are changes to the Arizona Constitution. The 200 level, citizens initiatives. So Prop 208 is a citizens initiative. It was gathered by signatures and placed on the ballot. It's one of the things that was placed in the Arizona Constitution that we have the right to do. 300 series are legislative referrals, or they are also a referendum. That's where 305 from the last cycle came from. That was with SOS, placing that on the ballot and referring that legislative action. And then the 400 series are the local ballot measures. In some communities like Pima County, for example, each bond or override gets a prop number. In Maricopa County, it's the school district. I wish, quite frankly, that Maricopa County gave prop numbers to all the local school bonds and overrides, because I think it's a lot strategically easier to talk about something when you have a number associated with it than, you know, Peoria override or something like that. So 208 is the Invest in Ed initiative. It is a 3.5 income tax surcharge on existing income tax rates over $250,000 for an individual or $500,000 for a couple. And that's the delta above 250 or above 500. So it's a 3.5% surcharge on that. The yes, no language shows what it pays for. And I know Expect More is going to share that in the chat box window, so you can learn more about that. But that's what education issue that is on the ballot. It's Proposition 208. A yes vote has the effect of putting it in place. A no vote has the effect of keeping the law as it is now.
And for the most part, educators are pro 208, and the funding would help us maintain more of our seasoned teachers, more of our new teachers, keep them in the schools. You know, Arizona does have a turnover rate where we start to lose our teachers around the first, second, third year, because they do tend to find work outside of the schools that will pay them at a higher competitive rate. The no votes would affect schools, because we would once again not have the funding to provide quality programs for our schools at the levels that we're currently funded at right now.
And the yes campaign's website is investined.com, I believe, and the no campaign is noprop208az.com if you want to learn more about both sides of the issue.
All right. Well, Paul and Tia, thank you so much for joining us today and for that great information on bonds, overrides, and initiative. Prop 208, of course, it's a big issue. There's a lot to get into on both sides, and so I really encourage people to seek out that information. I know for ABC 15, we have a whole website, abc15.com/schools, dedicated to the bonds and overrides and InvestInEd as well, and breaking out, what that tax surcharge would mean for individuals and for certain businesses in our state, and then also what it would mean for education and where that projected revenue would go. So highly encourage people to educate themselves on that. And also one more thing I wanted to kind of piggyback off of, Paul, what you said. You mentioned how local these bonds and overrides are, and these can either pass or fail by very small margins. And last year, Peoria Unified and Dysart in particular, they were going after bonds and overrides. Peoria's lost by only 133 votes. And so this year, if they do not pass it, they're at the step down of their override, and that money goes away. And so, you're looking at specials like band, art, music, services like school nurses, things that are really vital to the educational experience that are on the line. And I don't think people necessarily realize how close this can get, and just the importance of getting those votes in and being educated. And also, I know in Maricopa County, we have 18 districts, I believe, that have bonds or overrides on the ballot. And all of the overrides are continuations of overrides that are already in place. And so these aren't new overrides or even increases in overrides that are on the ballot. These are things that are already in place and that were passed many years ago, and they just want to make sure they stay in place. And so we could spend the whole day talking about bonds, overrides, and initiatives, but unfortunately we only have about 27 minutes left. So Paul and Tia, thank you so much again for that information. We really appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and move us on to our next speakers. They're going to be talking about the various races on the ballot. Chris Cotterman, he is the Director of Governmental Relations for the Arizona School Boards Association. He's in my personal Rolodex because of his vast knowledge related to governing boards. He's done many things with us at ABC 15. Great to see you again, Chris. He has a long history in education in Arizona. He specializes in Arizona elementary, secondary, and post-secondary education finance and regulations, the Arizona property tax system, Arizona state budget, policy formulation, and much more. And then we have Elenia Aguilar. She serves as Vice President for Strategies 360 Cultura. It is a political consulting firm, and she also serves as a governing board member of the Osborne School District. She has directed and managed state campaigns and successfully managed extensive development projects. So Chris, Elenia, thank you so much for being here. I'll go ahead and turn things over to you.
Thanks so much. As with before, happy to share the stage here with Elenia. She's been an awesome member for Osborne Elementary School District here in Central Phoenix. So as Danielle said, we could spend 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes easily talking about these topics as well. But we're just going to concentrate on a few key races. The important thing to note about candidates is there's a whole bunch of issues, whether it's healthcare, taxes, education, that are important to voters. And so, really, you make a decision on candidates based on a number of different factors. But if education is important to you, we're just going to talk real quickly about how each of those levels sort of affects education. And we're going to focus on three main areas. And those three areas are the United States Senate race, the state legislature, and your local governing board races. So all levels of government, from the president on down, probably have some bit to do with education in terms of regulation and implementation. But in terms of making policy, Congress, the legislature, and your local governing boards are big to focus on. So we have a Senate race here in Arizona this year. And so the two candidates, of course, are Martha McSally, the Republican, and Mark Kelly, the Democrat. And the Senate's important because it's one of two houses of Congress, obviously, that together make laws regarding education, and then most importantly, probably appropriate funding. So the way that we think about federal funding is the state, which we'll get to in a second, sets the major budget priorities for the state, including education. But the Congress appropriates money for the various federal programs that are designed to sort of step into those gaps where state funding is either insufficient or doesn't provide a specific priority. So the big one is special education. So students with special needs, students who are learning the English language, and students in poverty. Those are the big three. Those are known as, respectively, IDEA, Individuals with the Disabilities Education Act, ELL funding, we call it ELL funding or EL funding, and Title I. And then the fourth big one is the National School Lunch Program. So Congress appropriates funding that provides for school meals for students. And so those are the big four: special education, students in poverty, EL students, and school lunch. So I'm going to stop there on the federal level, and I'm going to let Elenia talk about how she sees those play out as a school board member in her district.
Thank you, Chris. Well, it's an honor to be here, and thank you to everyone who's attending and who's watching. I know that it's a Saturday and we all have other things going on with our families, but thank you again. So yeah, one example is the ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, which under ESSA falls our English learners, who you're referring to. I'm a former English learner. We know that in Arizona we have over 500,000 Latino students in our public schools, and over 75,000 of them are English learners. And we need to provide them support services, and this falls under this program. We know that right now, currently under this pandemic, we've had to become creative and innovative. And one of the things that we're very grateful for is, and this is why a Senate race is so critical, because these funds, directly impact us, is with our nutrition program, with our food and services programs, because most of our families who are in Title I schools, meaning they are living below the poverty level, and in my school district, all of our schools are Title I. So that means that 100% of our students receive free and reduced lunch, meaning that they depend on the foods that we provide them. So when this pandemic happened, we obviously weren't expecting this. And in order for us to provide our students and their families, because that's what school board members are in charge of, is ensuring that not only the students are thriving, but that we are also ensuring that our community, their families, are also thriving. And if they're not able to provide food at home, that we are doing so through these services. And we've been able to provide all of our families, and at some times their siblings, with transporting the breakfast and lunches to their homes. And we're very lucky. We're a small school district. We're able to transport that food. I know that some school districts have not been able to do so because they don't have the funding to transport so many meals, because they're larger school districts. And then that is so critical to the learning of a child, is ensuring that we are feeding our students, because if they're in a place, or their families have been impacted because of the pandemic and have lost their jobs or lost their homes, or there are so many tragedies going on, we at least provide the basic necessities that they need in order to thrive academically through this online virtual learning process. So that's one of the services that, this is why those races are so critical as well. And, Head Start programs, we all know that, children start at a disadvantage when they don't have access to a quality early childhood, like preschool program. So these programs allow our students, especially our students who are living in poverty, to start at an equal playing field. And that's when we talk about equity. What do we need to achieve equity? And I personally believe that Head Start, does that. So that's why these races are so critical to what's going on. And also because we are depending on the CARES Act. We've depended on the CARES Act. And, I believe that, every dollar that comes into our state, into our school district is so important, since our state, unfortunately, hasn't funded education adequately.
Outstanding. Like I said, a lot of federal stuff that we could obviously cover, but those are, you hit, I think, the big points about why the federal government, the big role that federal government plays in shaping those programs in Arizona. And as we've seen through the pandemic, also a lot of focus on the digital divide and things like that, trying to get access to the internet to underserved areas. So again, a federal role and a state role there to play as well, which brings us to our next, oh, go ahead, sorry.
I just wanted to add something to digital divide. Like, we already knew that we had a crisis, that this digital divide existed. And like I mentioned earlier, when I was referring to the bond and override and how that supported us in our school district, these disparities aren't just like, it's not enough just to provide a computer for our students. We need other supports, like we need tech supports and someone training the parent and someone training the teacher, because teachers, not all teachers, especially the older teachers who aren't used to all of this technology, and even people like my age, I have to be honest, like I've struggled just helping and supporting my students, and I'm bilingual and biliterate, and I believe that I can function and use a computer, but it has been very challenging for me. So I can't imagine what it's like for our families who do not speak English, who maybe have not had the opportunity and access to complete formal education, and that hasn't given them the opportunity to learn how to use and navigate a computer system or an online system. So there's a lot of challenges. It's not just providing that computer for the student or the Wi-Fi services. It's more than that. We are facing extreme problems and issues in our communities, and they will continue. This pandemic isn't going anywhere anytime soon.
Outstanding. And I think that's a good segue to the state level, which is the legislature. Now, with the legislature, we can't really name names because there are 30 legislative districts, and each one of them has 2 representatives and 1 senator. So, for this one, I'm just going to keep it high level and tell you that when you're evaluating your legislative candidates, what we look for is there's likely either 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans running for House, and 1 Democrat and 1 Republican running for Senate. There may be the odd Libertarian in there as well. Or if you're in a less competitive district, you might just have single Republicans or Democrats, single party ballots, depending. So it's a wide range. But what we look for in legislative candidates is the legislature controls the state budget, which is the largest sort of chunk of education funding, in the sense that the legislature controls the overall amount of state and local spending that you're allowed to have in your school district. So basically the amount per student is the number that the legislature has control over. And so, that's a big deal. In recent years, we've worked with the legislature to try to work on increasing the amount that goes to special education students, which is also part of the funding formula that they oversee, as well as things like state, to a certain amount, accountability policies for school districts, to a certain extent, state testing policy, although that has a little bit of a federal component as well. But the big things there are going to be the overall amount that can be spent on schools the amount of funding available for capital needs, for special education, for English learners, for things like that. And so they have a big responsibility in budgeting. And you know, we have seen a restoration of funds over the last, you know, 4 or 5 years, which we've been incredibly grateful for. But I think the main thing that we see out there that we continue to struggle with is teacher pay and things like that. So the ability to retain teachers, I think, is the biggest thing, and that's going to be largely a responsibility of the state legislature. So when evaluating your candidates, that's the things that, you know, you might want to ask them about or look for information on. The last thing on state, I think, is also infrastructure, and the legislature did consider some broadband infrastructure initiatives the last session, and the governor did use some federal money to implement some of those that didn't get passed in the shortened legislative session. But those are going to take time, and so we appreciate the infrastructure investments, but we've also been working trying to get the legislature to focus more on near-term, you know, access issues as well. And so, you know, and then all other, in sort of broadly speaking, the legislature makes laws that impact your daily life, whereas Congress is sort of a higher level issue. So that's sort of the legislative picture. I want to make sure we have time to get to local stuff. So Elenia, did you have any comments on the legislative stuff?
No comments. I just wanted to make sure that we add that we are voting for people who have the same values as we do. If we want public education fully funded, we need to vote for people who actually hold those same values and priorities. So that's all I want to add to that. And it's the most important races for our public education, because they control the state budget.
Absolutely. And so with the time we have left, want to touch on school boards, which I know you have experience with. I will say a little bit here, and that is that every school district has a school board that's elected. And that school board, you know, takes the revenue that the state gives and decides sort of how to apportion it, as well as makes the policy decisions about really day-to-day stuff in your school districts, like curriculum and things like that. So they're super important. They have quite a bit of influence, which we think is good. Full disclosure, we're the school board people, so we love our school board members. But the other thing that ties back into Paul is that they get to decide sort of when to go out for a bond and override, and also, you know, what those things are going to be for. So you're the expert here, but I just want to touch on the fact that you're going to have, you know, a few names on your ballot that you may not recognize, and it's worth getting to know those names, Googling them, figuring out who they are, what they stand for, or talking to your neighbors, going to events if you can, or virtual events, to figure out what they stand for, and because they have a lot of influence. And I'll let you speak to your own experience on the board.
Thank you, Chris. And I totally agree. Like, if you don't know who's running, you definitely need to ask your neighbor. Or if you're a parent, ask your teachers. Teachers now more than ever are very informed, very aware, because they know that the decisions that school board members make directly impact them. So now they've all become very engaged in the past recent years. They've created so many movements that have been so fruitful for education. So ask your teachers if you're a parent. And I would say that right now, the most important decision maker for like the most precious cargo that we have is our school board members, because we are responsible for the reopening of schools now under this pandemic. So essentially, we're responsible for people's lives. So I think that, you know, nowhere in this world did anyone leave this decision up to school board members, but in this country. So it's been an interesting journey, and not a journey that a lot of us anticipated would happen, but it has been stressful, it has been fruitful, it has been everything, because we really are in charge of, you know, your most precious cargo, which are your children, and then the lives of not just teachers, but all of our staff. So think about that when you're voting, when you're looking at your ballot and realizing like, oh, well, you know, school board races don't really matter. Like, you're prioritizing the president. Well, the decisions that we make actually matter, and now more than ever. So I really do believe that we should, like, become educated on who is running and what their priorities are, what their values are. If you don't know, like Mr. Cotterman stated, you can Google them. You can ask, you know, your neighbors. You can inform yourself about these people who are running, because just like in any race, electing the wrong person will have long-term effects, and not just for ourselves, for our future generations. And I've heard this said like numerous times, that this election is the most important one in our lifetimes. There's my English learner, in our lifetime, and it is. This is my second time voting ever. In 2014, I became a US citizen and voted for the first time. And it was an honor for me. That's my American dream, being able to vote for the first time for myself and winning my election, and now representing our community and making decisions on behalf of our community is so important. And I can only say that this election is the most important one of our lifetimes, and it will affect the future of all of our children and our nation and actually our planet. So please vote.
All right, some great information there from Chris and Ilenia. Thank you so much for all that you do in our communities, for our school boards, for our students, and just for your time today on a Saturday to share that important information. As you both were talking about school board candidates, at least in Maricopa County, the Maricopa County School Superintendent's Office has a great resource. Their website is schoolsup.org. So that's another spot that people can go. They have all of the district school board candidates. There are a lot. They have all of their, you know, statements of intent. That's a great way to go, and you can just click through and really see, you know, who's running for a seat in your district and what they're about. So thank you both again for your time. As we get ready to wrap things up here, we do have time for just a couple questions for our panelists. Chris, while we still have you here, as we're talking about the importance of researching candidates and voting for candidates, what happens if someone votes for a candidate, they win, and then they don't do what they promised, or they stray from what their platform was? What's the course of action for folks out there?
Well, this is a common problem in elections, right? The campaigns and, you know, governing are not the same. So that's the first thing to understand, is that when someone campaigns on a broad set of issues, that's fine. But then when they get into office, they actually have to implement those, and the skill sets are not necessarily the same. So, you know, a little bit of leeway is, you know, nice. You know, you don't need to, they're not going to get everything done in the first 90 days. But the thing to do to your elected officials at that point is to let them know that you're watching. So, you know, nothing is more powerful than telling a candidate, an elected official, hey, I voted for you because I believed in you and you're really disappointing me. That's powerful, but also, you know, pressure, you know, letting them know you're watching. But then at the end of the day, Arizona does have the ability to recall candidates. It's a big lift. It requires a lot of signatures, but if someone is letting you down 100% completely and totally, then you can organize a recall effort against them and try to get a new person. But most likely, it is keeping an eye on your government after the election. And when the next election comes up in 2 years' time, maybe you make a different choice or find someone else to run against them. That's how the system works.
And Chris, you and I have talked about this before, about the fact that everything is virtual now, at least for the foreseeable future, makes it even easier to be watching and kind of keeping tabs on what's going on during these meetings and what people are actually doing. So some good advice there. Paul, I wanted to bring you back for just a moment. All right, great. Making sure we can see you. Question, you know, we talked about how this is a big election year, right? And so there's a lot of attention on obviously the presidential race, the issues, but how can people stay engaged with all of this, with politics, but also with, you know, some of these bond override measures and things that are happening in their school districts, even during years when there isn't a big election like this?
Well, school board meetings are all public meetings. You can attend any one of those. A lot of them now, especially one of the benefits of all this technology is that a lot of them have gone online, so you can actually watch them from home, which is excellent. I will tell you, they notice if you show up and speak at those meetings. But one of the other things is most school districts, if not all, I believe are required to put out a publicity pamphlet. It's those black and white booklets that have information. School districts actually communicate quite a bit with what they're doing. You just have to take the time to track it down and look for it. One of the things that I actually wanted to talk about is that the Auditor General puts out a report on every single school district. You can go to azauditor.gov and look at reports, and you can look up any school district, your local district, and see exactly how the money is being spent. And when he talks about administrative costs and those sorts of things, one thing that I think is really important for everybody to note is that when you talk about classroom spending, that does not take into account, just by the categories, things like lunches and buses and air conditioning and plant operations. So that's why you can, I know Chris is a big passion about this too. So look at that. And so you can see when we have this debate about money making it into the classroom, a lot of those things, like you said before, you can't teach in a classroom that doesn't have air conditioning. So that is in the classroom despite not being in that category. So take the time, go to the school district's website. I will tell you, there's a lot of information on there if you just take a minute to look.
Absolutely. And also, if you're tracking board meetings, I've learned over the years, those board meeting agendas, there's a lot of stuff in there that's going on that you probably don't even realize, even just approving certain contracts and different programs. So that's another great resource that we encourage people as they continue to stay engaged with their school communities that they check out. Thank you so much, Paul, for that. And one more question, Elenia, this is for you, especially right now, there's a lot of concern about voting in person, what sorts of protocols are in place. That question, is it safe to vote in person? And so especially, as a school board member, I mean, how are you informing your communities and the voters in your schools about what to do with this?
That's a great question. We have a great county reporter website and a great county reporter. He has done an excellent job. One of our problems, not only in education, but also in every sector, is language access. He's done a great job at ensuring that all of the information is not only in English, but also in Spanish. He has a ballot ready to vote. Tenga su boleta lista, tenga boletalista.org. And he provides information on how you can vote. Like, for example, I have my ballot, la pones adentro, you put it inside, and you can mail it safely. And that is the safest way to vote. But you can also vote in person, and they're doing a great job. They've heightened their safety measures for in-person voting, like they're ensuring that there are large spaces to allow for distancing. There are workers who are wearing masks, gloves, face shields, and we actually have one here, part of our panel. He's a poll worker, and he can hear more about the safety measures that they're taking, their extra precautions to ensure that we are safe and that we are actually voting, because we need to ensure that we are protecting our community. And whether you do it por correo, by mail, or you do it in person, you will encounter someone like Mr. Cotterman, who will be wearing a face shield and who will be wearing gloves, who will be giving you directions. And I believe our reporters do an excellent job in ensuring that we are safe and protected. Mr. Cotterman, did I miss anything?
I would just say two things. One, if you are a Spanish speaker and you go to vote in person, you will have the option to check in on a screen, and it will prompt you in Spanish. And then at the end, you will get a Spanish language ballot. So if you are comfortable, more comfortable voting in Spanish, you can do that at any polling location. And the second thing is, when you go, make sure you bring your driver's license or your ID. If your ID does not have your current address on it, or you do not have a photo ID, bring with you your voter registration card and or 2 pieces of mail that's a utility bill or your mortgage statement or your car registration bills, basically, that have your current name and address on them, and that will allow you to vote. So if you're going to go vote in person, make sure you have that information available.
Well, thank you so much for this amazing information. Unfortunately, we are out of time, and I hope everyone learned at least one thing during this past hour. I know I have learned a lot as a mother, as a voter, as a member of the community. And as a reminder, check out the event website at www.yourvoteyourschools for a number of voter resources, including more information about bonds and overrides and the Prop 208, a variety of tools to find out who your candidates are, and even tools to learn where they stand on the issues. You even find some resources for sharing some of what you have learned today with others. And participating in an election is one of the key ingredients for American life. I know that, and I don't take it for granted. Yes, Elenia, it took me many, many years to be able to have this right to be able to vote. So I do not take it for granted, and I make sure I exercise this voting right for those that are in my family, in my community, that is still in that process. So I urge you to make sure that you participate and you focus on all the initiatives, all the propositions, all the platforms of the different candidates when it comes to education, to our schools. It's very important we come together in this. And also, many people in the country, around the world, do not have the same freedom. We have to remember that, nor did many Americans in centuries past. No matter what you believe or who you support, it is important to exercise your right. So get out there and vote, participate. That is very important. And remember, vote all the way down to the ballot. Our kids in our communities are counting on us to make education a priority when we vote. Thank you, everyone. Danielle, it's been a pleasure to share the screen with you. And thank you to our panelists. Do not forget to share this link if you're watching us on Facebook so more people can join the conversation, get educated, and get out there and vote. Thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your Saturday.